Hey everybody, and welcome to Athens-Clarke County Library's Tuesday tutorial from the Heritage Room. My name's Ashley, and I'll be going through how to use Ancestry Library Edition to research US Census records, the federal population schedules. So the easiest way to access Ancestry Library Edition is to go to our homepage, athenslibrary.org, which I'm there now. And then if you scroll down, you'll see Galileo right here. So we get access to Ancestry Library Edition through Galileo. And right now you can access Ancestry Library Edition from home for free. They're providing that through this period of time through the summer. So you can see here, I'm already signed in. It says Welcome Athens Regional Library System. I'm going to click login as another user just so you can see what that sign in looks like. Because when you first click to go to Galileo, it's not going to automatically log you in. So I can log in with our Galileo password. It will also authenticate through your IP address, so you'll have that option as well. If you need the Galileo password, just give us a call at the library or email us at heritageroomref@athenslibrary.org, or you can message us on our Facebook page and we'll be happy to give you that Galileo password. So you can see in here now we are logged in, and I'm going to go to databases, and I'm going to click on A to get to Ancestry because it starts with the letter A. And scroll down, and there we are, Ancestry Library Edition. So you can tell now that we are logged in. If I was just to go to ancestry.com, here I'll open up another tab and show you. See, I'd have to subscribe and sign in and all of that. But you do get National Archives records, some records for free, and this does include the census records. So even if you're at home, you can look at the census records for free. But right now, Ancestry is providing that full library edition for free at home. So you can go directly to begin searching. But again, what I talked about in Tuesday's tutorial from last week when we were going over Georgia historic newspapers, you really want to target your searches. And the reason why we always look at census records is because it was just a general record that was kept every 10 years. It has a fantastic amount of information. It's consistent. And you get a good picture of the progression of a family throughout time. It helps you provide a framework when you're not sure of death dates, birth years, sibling names, who lived in the household, things like that. It really provides that basic framework, the skeleton for your family tree. So it's a great place to start if you're just getting into genealogies, to start with those census records. So what we're going to do today, because we have so many different years here, instead of going through each year, I'm going to kind of skip through so you can see what a census record looks like and perform searches that I know because I've done my own family research and I've confirmed a lot of details, and kind of walk you through how to do that. So we're going to start with 1940. It's the most recently available census record. 1950 is not going to come out for another couple years. And, so you have to start there. So you need to find family members who were alive in 1940 in order to start your search. And that can be a hurdle for a lot of us who are a little bit younger. I'm in my 30s. So for me, I only have one set of grandparents out of, both sets that were actually alive in 1940. My maternal grandparents were not born until after 1940. So I had to ask them about parental information to be able to find those families on the census. You could also, if you have great aunts or uncles, talk to them, or cousins, to kind of narrow down your search and to find people there. So we're going to start with my paternal grandfather. His name was Wesley Scholl. I know that he was born in 1931, and the only reason why I ever know this It's because he was buried in Arlington, and that's what it says on his headstone. I couldn't remember. I didn't know when he was born, but I found his, headstone on Arlington, and that's what I got. I also do know that he was born in New Jersey. He was born and raised there, lived there until he entered the military. So, Wesley Scholl, New Jersey, and born in 1930. And we're just going to leave it at that. He was a little boy then, 9, 10 years old. All right. So I don't see Wesley Scholl, but there's a W. Barrett. So I know just from personal stories that my grandfather as a child was known as Barry. His full name is Wesley Barrett Scholl, so he went by Barry more often than Wesley when he was growing up. So we can see here it gives us a nice transcription of the full record, and it will list his parents and his siblings. So you can see there he's got a brother and a sister and parents. And you can see here his parents named their firstborn children after themselves, which is quite common, not an unusual thing. And then we're going to view the actual record because I don't want to just trust the transcription. I want to go and look at the actual text for myself. So you can see here on the census, on Ancestry.com, on these census records, they will highlight the household. So you see here the household's kind of in green, and then the person I searched for is a yellow color. And I'm going to zoom in. Instead of using this trackpad, I'm going to use the little zoom buttons, these little toolbar on the right-hand side. And then you can see a little hand pops up, and as I press and hold, he squeezes, and I can move the screen around. It's kind of cute. So one thing that I always like to point out that people don't realize is that the street name oftentimes is listed here on the side. So if we hover over, it'll tell us that they lived on Maple Avenue. So this is really fantastic because then we can go to a city directory for Merchantville or Camden County, New Jersey, and Merchantville's the district, so not necessarily the city. So we could look in, Camden County, figure out where that city was in Merchantville, and then look in the city directories to figure out if they are listed there and see, what was in their neighborhood, what was around the corner from them, and really get a picture of where little Barry grew up. So you can tell here his birthplace is in Camden, New Jersey, so we know that. He was 9, and more than likely he does have a birth record because he was born, in 1931. So, and again, vital records weren't federally mandated until 1919. So you can't guarantee that the people that you're looking for have a birth record out there unless they were born 1919 or more recent. So you can see Elizabeth J. and an Elliot. I want to say that's a W rather than an M. It might be an M or an N. And you can see here that his mother was born in Philadelphia, as was his sister, and his dad was born in Vineland. Philly's not that far from around there, so it just might have been that they traveled to the hospital there or were, nearby. Oh, and look, his father was an x-ray doctor who worked for himself. So you get really nice occupation information here. It'll tell you what his income was for the year, if he had income coming from other sources, how many weeks they worked. So he worked the full 52 weeks in a year. It asks for hours worked week prior to the census. So for that week prior, he doesn't have anything listed. Doesn't mean he didn't work. But, he just didn't list anything. Employed for pay, yes. And you'll see sex, race, age, marital status, whether they attended school, what grade they finished. So it looks like he went to college the 4th year. So he had a university degree, and his wife completed high school up to the 3rd year. And his children are still in school. So clearly that's why he was a radiologist. He had gone to college for at least 4 years. And then here you'll see whether they owned their home or not, the home's value, whether it had a farm, and the house number. So some really great information there. So say I want to save this record. One of the easiest ways to do that is by going up into this right-hand corner where it says save. And we have two options here. Save to this computer, which is a classic. You can just download it and save it as an image, put it in your files on your computer or on an external drive, something like that. But then we also have this option for send image home. I really like this option because say you left your thumb drive at, home, you're in the library or you're somewhere else, doing your research. It's not your own computer, something like that. Or just as a backup, I really like this option as well. I generally do this with all of my resources because what it does is you can enter in your email address, confirm it, enter it twice, and hit send email. What this will do is every time you do this, it will save in the cloud on Ancestry connected to your email address. So you'll receive this email address and it will have all of your saved documents within it. Not just this one that you saved today, but all the ones that you have saved since you have been using that email address with Ancestry Library Edition. So it's just an extra backup to the documents that you save and that you want access to. So I highly recommend it just as an extra precaution, to save your stuff. So we're going to go to this toolbar down here and kind of run through each of these options. So the first one is to make it full screen. That's up to you if you want to do that or not. I find it a little confusing sometimes. If you navigate back to your results, it'll stop doing full screen. And you can see here this little X pop down. Yep, there we go. To exit out of full screen. And then this option, which is nice, which will bring up that same transcription that we looked at. And then our nice handy toolbar. So I really like this too. You can go to print. So there's a couple different options for this too. You can print the entire image. So it'll scrunch up that census page onto an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. You can see what it would look like. And then also print out, it'll print 2 pages. So what it'll print also is your print index or source data. And I highly recommend this as well. Your source data is how do you access this record in the future? It's the catalog record for it. And it's how you can access or how you can do citations, to do citations. So say you're going to publish a family history, you would need that source information to make your citations. If you were to join a society like the Daughters of the American Revolution and needed to confirm information, you would need this source data. So I always recommend going ahead and doing that so you have it and don't have to go back crawling through images to find it, that you just have it in perpetuity. Or you can print the zoomed view. So what it'll print is what you're looking at on the screen. It's hard to kind of balance that one out. But if we do print entire image and hit continue, so it says best, to bring up your print settings. So you can see here mine's in landscape. I'm never going to be able to read that, or portrait. So I need to change it to landscape. And then I could go to my more settings and change my paper size. So say that I did have legal paper. See, and it still doesn't stretch it. So this is where I don't like it. I would rather, it's great for that source information to print the source data. But if I really wanted to get a printed page of the census record that I could read easily, that's when I would download it as an image and then bring it up in an imaging editing software to print it into onto a legal size sheet of paper. That way I can kind of play with the image a little bit more and fill up that page fully. You could even download and save as an image and then drop it into a Word file, change your paper size, change your orientation, stretch the image out a little bit, trying to maintain it's a good aspect ratio so it's not all stretched and distorted, and then print it that way on your larger size paper. It takes a few extra steps, but if you really like having that printed copy sitting in front of you and a copy that you can read and read clearly, I do recommend that. You can go ahead and this is another way to download straight to your computer. Clicking there, and you can see it automatically popped up down here at the bottom of my Chrome bar. And then, I could open it, show it in the folder, rename it. I always rename my files. And I do a file naming convention, so it's easy for me to find them later. That's what I always find to be a challenge is like you name it something random and then you can't figure out what it is later. So, I mean, we do that all the time with our own photographs and things like that. So I've kind of come up with a system where I'll do the year. So this is the year of the record. So this is 1940. I would put census so I could, year, type of record. And then I always list on the records, I list the name of the head of household at the time with any of the records, because it's especially the census records, because it's just easier to kind of organize it in that way. So I wouldn't list Wesley Barrett. I would actually list Elliot Scholl. So I would do 1940 census, Scholl, Elliot, surname first. It just makes it a little bit easier to find later. We can flip and play with the image, invert color, so essentially making it negative to positive, which I can never read that, so I'm going to invert it back. And then change our settings here where we can turn off the highlight households, the text tips, which are the text tips are the things that pop up, like the Philadelphia thing. Name labels, column labels, which I love having the column labels. You'll notice like as you scroll up and down the screen, those column labels will scroll with you. So it just makes it easier to figure out what they're talking about in that column on the table and different things there. And then of course, just the zoom bar is here. We could even go to the next page in the census record, which I find really helpful to do. You can go back to it because you can look at what their neighbors did and who their neighbors were, really get, again, a feel for that neighborhood, not just by looking at the street name, but, looking at the different occupations of people who lived there. Maybe you'll find out that your grandpa grew up next to his childhood sweetheart and she later became his wife. And that's how they met. So I find kind of looking at their neighbors to see if relatives lived nearby, or just to kind of get a feel of the community that they lived in. I think is really, really helpful whenever you're doing research. It can oftentimes lead to other clues and hints along the way. So, all right, so that's the 1941, the most recent census. Gives us a lot of details. It's easy to navigate. You get a lot of information there. It may not seem like a lot, but it's a lot, especially if you go back and look at our other records. I'm going to move my face back over. And we're going to go and look. We're going to rewind back to 1900. Let's do 1900. So I think no. So John's father, Elliot, was born in 1902. So he would not have been, or Wesley's father, Elliot, was born in 1902. So he would not have been alive yet. So we're kind of fast forwarding, but I do know that Elliot's father's name is John Scholl, and that he was also born in New Jersey, and that his spouse's name, so Elliot's mother's name, was Bessie. See, there's a lot of information on this census record. We're going to search, and there he is. So John Scholl, married to Bessie. And they're in Vineland or Cumberland. And they're with John E. Scholl, which is Elliot's older brother, who's only 2 months old at the time, tiny little baby. So we're going to open up this record so you can see what the census looked like in 1900. So this is 40 years in the past. And they are right there. Handwriting is a little bit different, a lot more uniform, actually, a little bit easier to read. Oh, and look, we get their actual birth years on this instead of just their ages. So this is when I would pull out a sheet of paper and start furiously writing those down. So I could later go and, look for them further. And there's no occupation listed for John Sr. Don't like that. So not sure what they were doing. It says Bessie was in Connecticut, or she was born in New Jersey, but her parents were born in Connecticut. So clearly there was a transition there at some point in time. They've only been married for a year and have had their one child. So interesting. And again, we can do all the same things with it. There's not as much information here. Let's see. Sex, race, birth month, birth year. We get that birth year, which is fantastic. That way you don't have to do the math and guessing. Here's some interesting information. So they're not immigrants, but if you do have immigrants in your family who immigrated from Europe, because we do know there's a mass flux of European immigration, from 1880 to about 1920. And so this is where you start to get that information in here. And you can tell they did not live in an immigrant community, clearly, because look, nobody on that page immigrated. They were all born in the United States. But if they had, you would get their immigration year, how many years they lived in the US, and whether or not they were naturalized. Because naturalization became a thing then. And then they ask about literacy information. Can you read? Can you write? Can you speak English? Whether they rented or owned their home. They got an R, so meaning they rented their home. And was it a farm or a house? And it was a house, so they lived, in a neighborhood. So no occupation information. All right. So let's go back. And I'm going to talk about the 1890 census just really quickly. The 1890 census, for the most part, does not exist. So we actually have a large 20-year gap in information here. What happened is there was a fire that happened in the Commerce Department in D.C. in 1921, and we lost the majority of the 1890 census. The only portions that are available is this very, very short list right here. So the only portions from Georgia are the Muskogee County ones in Columbus. So if your family was lucky enough to be in Muskogee County in Georgia in 1890, you have documentation of that, or for any of these other counties listed here. But for the rest of us, and for most of us, that's not the case. So it kind of stinks a good bit. It's not the best. Um, but it's what happens, and this is why I always tell folks, even now and even today with our digital capabilities to save your information in a variety of formats and in a variety of places, just because you never know what's going to happen. So, all right, I'm going to go back, and then we are going to look at, let's jump even further back to, yeah, we'll find them on here, I think. We're going to go to 1850. So pre-Civil War. Um, You're like, why are you searching for John Scholl again? Everybody in my family was named John Scholl. Some people consider that lucky. I consider it to be kind of irritating because you can never know who is who and which one you're talking about. So it kind of gets to be a pain sometimes. You kind of have to label them by their birth years. It's just the easiest way to do it. Um, so not fun. This is where these little descriptions on the records do become helpful, though. Um, so this was the first time in history in 1850 that every name was recorded, and you're like, what? They didn't record? No, they did not record everybody's name. So prior to 1850, they only recorded the head of household's name, and then everybody else was a tick mark. So let's just see if perhaps we can find. Oh, they don't like me today. Let's try it again. Oh, it'd be helpful. Search. Okay, so there's a few of them. I'm pretty sure this is the one. Yeah. I'm seeing two Margarets on there, which is confusing. Margaret Scholl, who's 60. So Charles Scholl. And you can see here the text starts to get more and more flouncy. So this has to be. These are two different names. Clearly, we can tell that by the handwriting. One's 18, one's 16. They said that one was Charles. This one looks more like a Charles to me, and that looks like a different name. And then Anne. There's our John, who's 11. Azaria Scholl, Sarah, Louisa, and then a Margaret Scholl who's 65. There's a Margaret who's 40 there. So two older women with a bunch of children in the home. Married within the year. That's the 40-year-old who attended school, and somebody else married within the year. So this one's confusing. This is where you'd have to really go back and do a lot of your research to confirm. You'd want to go and look at the 1860 or 1840 census. Well, see, because names aren't listed in 1840. So this is when you want to really look at land records to see if you can find mention of any of these folks. The further back you get in time, the more and more difficult it is to do the research here. But you can even tell from our transcription, this just doesn't feel right. That very well, like this Margaret, or Margaret who's 65, very well could be the mother of the Margaret who's 40, who perhaps is widowed and is raising her children, on her own. Um, it's not common for them to be single for very long. They generally get remarried pretty quickly. Let me go back to those results for 1850. See, I think there's a lot of John Scholl. So this is where I would really have to do my research to narrow down like which one is it. And you can see here's a Jonathan Scholl and then another John Scholl in there in Fairfield and Columbia. Here's another one, John Scholl, who's 10. So like you would really have to narrow down by age and then by, like respective relatives and things like that to figure out like which John Scholl is my John Scholl. We do know that he lived in Jersey, and you can see here the ones that are Scholl, Scul, which I would want to look at that actual document to see if it was a transcription error to really narrow down and figure out my choices. And this is when it helps, like if you've done, you did the census stuff, from years prior and you've fleshed out your research with land records, with wills, things like that. You're going to hit a wall with the census records because you're not going to be able to narrow down to figure out who's who just because you're not going to know everybody's siblings' names, things like that. So this John Scholl is 65, and it does, in fact, I don't know if that's an S or not. Like this is when I'd want to go and look at how this person writes their other, letters for the other surnames. Smith. See, and I almost want to say that's Jewel, Jewel. Yeah, rather than an S. It might not be though, but those are the things you really have to look at and kind of determine for yourself. And this is why it's not easy to do family research going back this far. And you really do need to confirm through a variety of sources and not just the census record. You can't take the census record for absolute and utter truth. You have to think of how the census was really collected throughout the years. So, it wasn't done by like a mail-in form or online. They didn't have those options in 1850. What they would do is actually show up on your doorstep, knock on your door. You would tell them, you would answer questions for the census takers. They would write it down, get back probably up on a horse right away, and then, go back to their central office and then write it in these giant ledgers. So you have to think it's like telephone. Somebody's telling somebody something, somebody else is writing it down, and then another person, maybe the same, but there's a third writing. There's a third step. There's a second writing down of the information. So, and you have to think they're hearing this information too. They're not always checking for spelling. They're making assumptions about spelling and things like that. You also have to take into account a lot of folks weren't educated beyond, primary school. So, did they know how to read and write? The folks who were reporting, your family members, they very may well have not known how to spell their own name, um, and just kind of guessed. So you have to always take that into consideration with the census when you're talking about spelling. Don't just assume because it's not spelled right, it's not your relative. And you can see here, like Scholl, that very well could be Scholl as well. Scholl is a common surname in that like mid-Atlantic area. You can see, there's tons of these Skolls. Scholl, Scholl. not that far apart. And, the actual pronunciation. So you really have to take that into account when you're looking at census records is, oh, it's not spelled right. Don't dismiss it because of that. You really need to look and to narrow and to confirm with other sources that this is or is not, your family or the folks you're looking for. So just to kind of give some context, we're going to go and look at the 1820 census. We're going to jump back again. I don't think the Scholls are on. Well, no, they're on this one. There's Scholls that existed. Of course there are. Not sure if the first name was John. We're just going to do Scholl. We know that they lived in Jersey. That was the first place they settled and they stayed there. You can see these responses look very different. So white free persons under 16, free white persons over 25, total free white person, total slaves, total free colored persons, totaled all persons, white slaves, colored, or other. So we have a few here. Probably not the folks that we're looking for, but that's fine. We're just going to open up a record to kind of see what it looks like. So this is an Esther Scholl in Lexington, South Carolina. They were enumerated on August 7th, 1820. So there are 2 free white males between the age of 10 and 15, 2 free white persons, males 16 through 25, 1 under 10, females 10 through 15, there are 3, 16 through 25, there's 1, free white persons, females 45 and over, 1, number of persons engaged in agriculture, so there are 4 people working as farming, engaged in agriculture. Free white persons under the age of 16, there's 6 children under the age of 16. Free white persons over 25, there's 1. Total free white persons, 10. Total all persons, white, slaves, colored, or other, so 10. So it doesn't look like they had any slaves or colored on their property. So yeah, this is quite a mess. You can't really tell. This is why this is fantastic. Your transcription on the side is fantastic because these columns don't really mean anything. And there's our Esther Scholl right here. And you can tell it's not highlighted. And they just have the numbers and the tick marks. And that's it. That's it. So no people listed out by name. They were just numbers. Everybody but the head of household. And clearly Esther, we can make the assumption it's a female name. And she was considered head of household. So there's a story there. I don't have enough information to figure out the answer to that story, but there very well could be a story there. So this is why it gets so much more difficult the further we go back in time, is because less and less and less people were documented. You get your homeowners, your landowners, your heads of households documented. You might get the occasional societal thing in a newspaper, but you have to also think of like the type of country the United States was in the 1820 and how things were documented, how information was disseminated in order to understand the context of how they decided to save information. And, it makes sense, but the lack of information is daunting to me, especially whenever you consider how European countries were keeping information at the time. So it's really primitive. And of course, the first census wasn't taken until 1790. Let's see if there are any Scholls in New Jersey. Again, these are just random searches to see if we can find anything and anybody. We've got some Scholls. in Maryland and Pennsylvania, but it doesn't look like any in Jersey. Which, let's see, when was New Jersey established as a state? 1787. So it was a state in 1790. But we just don't have any Schultz listed. But let's look at Miss Catherine in Frederick, Maryland. So you can see here, there's folks listed on either side of the page. And again, we have to search for her name. And oh, I see Charles, what looks like Scholl. There's a Frederick Scholl. And then they just have the totals listed out of the people. That's it. Ah, it's so crazy. So again, this is where during this time period, like the most important records were land records. Land records meant that you had value in society. If you own land, that was your worth, was your property. So, looking at land records really provides, during this time period, really provides the most information that you can find for folks. But, thank you for rolling through the different census records for me. I know that was quick. It was a fast overview, just what all the different census records can look like. But I really recommend, starting with one of the branches of your family. So, starting, say, with your paternal grandfather and just following that back as far as you can get it, and then filling in with other resources. I find that if you jump from different branch to branch in your family tree, you oftentimes get confused and kind of muddle people up. I always say stay on one branch until you hit a wall and then move to the next branch. It really helps you stay interested and stay focused. Focus is the most important part, I think, in your family research. And again, if you hit a wall, move to another branch. You can come back to it later. It's not going to go anywhere. So, that's our overview of the US Census Records. I appreciate you guys listening today. If you have any questions, please be sure to email us at heritageroomref@athenslibrary.org. Or message us on Facebook, on our Facebook page, Heritage Room, Athens-Clarke County Library, Heritage Room. I hope to see you guys sometime soon in the library, but from now on, you can see me on here. Thanks. Have a great day.